What is up? Today we are going to be talking about fighters that didn't pan out the way we thought they were going to. That's right. These are the fighters that didn't meet our expectations, whether that was them not being able to stay at the top and contend for titles and be a top-ranked guy, or just them not being as popular as we all thought they were going to be. And let's waste no time. Let's get right into this. The first fighter that didn't exactly pan out, Cody Garbrandt. That's right. This is like the perfect example of a fighter that didn't pan out the way people thought he was going to. I mean, even when this guy was on a loss streak, people were still talking about Cody as, he's just not lucky. Cody's luck is just not really there. But in reality, he was never actually that good and always had a very, very simpleton-like style. And this is the thing. If you guys don't know, Cody Garbrandt had a couple of fights in the UFC, worked his way up into a belt, and was able to beat Dominick Cruz, one of the all-time greats, and had like an aura farming performance where he was styling on him and emoting on him and dropping him all over the place. And people were like, man, the Garbrandt era is here. This guy is, he's got aura. He's not afraid to trash talk, although he wasn't like the most quick-witted guy on the mic. But he's got power. He's got a fun fight style. He's going to stick around at the top for years. And then he gets knocked out twice against TJ Dillashaw. And then he goes on a downward spiral, getting knocked out by Pedro Muniz, getting destroyed by Rob Font, just getting chinned over and over and over again. And it's like outside of the Dominick Cruz win, the best win Cody Garbrandt has in the last decade, it seems, is Trevin Jones. And you'll hear to this day people saying things like, the streets will never forget Prime Cody, man. Prime Garbrandt. As if this guy wasn't like a tadpole when he hit. Dude, this guy wasn't even in his prime when he was a champion. Cody was in his prime when he was getting chinned and pieced up by Rob Font. That's prime Garbrandt. Dude, the reason for this is the other thing I want to say. The reason for TJ Dillashaw's bantamweight GOAT talk, and not TJ. And I'm not talking about TJ Dillashaw talking about himself as the bantamweight GOAT. I'm talking about hardcore fans that when people are debating, Merab versus Cruz versus Aljo, you'll have some people that are like, well, what about TJ? The only reason for that is because he beat this guy. This is like the prime example of TJ Dillashaw's resume aging like milk. Because he beat Cody Garbrandt twice. Those were the biggest wins of his career. Maybe not the best, obviously. His wins over Barao were better. He had other really good wins throughout his career. But if you take away the Cody Garbrandt wins, which again, you think of TJ, you think of this title reign. You think of the title reign because he had these big fights with a lot of heat, a heated rivalry with Cody Garbrandt were these viral KO moments. Take that away because, again, Garbrandt's resume has aged so terribly. Doesn't have the strongest argument for bantamweight GOAT. So, again, Cody Garbrandt, he was like a one-hit wonder champion. People expected him to have a reign. He didn't have a reign. People expected him to at least be able to hold down the fort. And it almost seemed like he was going to be able to hold down, a top-ranked spot in that bantamweight division when he was able to knock out Rafael Assunção. And that was an amazing moment. That was 2020, just getting started at the apex. He had this viral moment, but then again, it just hasn't really panned out. And to this day, outside of Dominick Cruz, he doesn't really have any great wins. So that's the first guy I want to put up on this list. The next one is Guram Kutateladze. That's right. You guys remember. I remember. Guram Kutateladze, despite only having 2 fights in the UFC, was just considered a top 5 fighter at lightweight. By basically not just the real hardcore fans, not just by the guys who say things like, yeah, man, guys from the 90s, that were better than today. No. Or I'm not talking about the people saying Bellator fighters are better than UFC fighters to try to seem like they're hardcore. I'm literally just talking about regular hardcore fans, like most of them were just so convinced it was just like a thing that people would say in passing because it was so obvious that Guram Kutateladze, he's one of the greatest fighters ever. People, I've literally heard quotes of people saying, and nobody would be shocked if Guram's fighting for a belt next, right? And at any time, Guram's going to be fighting for that belt. It could be him next. People were literally saying that. The Weasel was talking about how Guram could, be a bad matchup for, I forget exactly who it was. Maybe it was Fiziev. Maybe it was like a Poirier or something, but the Weasel was hyping up Guram. It was like the Weasel's favorite fighter at the time. Again, Guram Kutateladze had people fooled into thinking he was basically like a staple top 5 lightweight, like a Poirier and a Gagey, a Charles, with only 2 fights in the UFC. Both were losses. And I always knew the reason why. It's because he fought Mateusz Gamrot, got his hand raised, but Gamrot was actually robbed. And then he had a fight with Denis Magulov on the Texas card, and it was like a competitive fight. And this is the thing. Because Guram had competitive fights with Gamrot, Polish, Eastern Europe, Denis Magulov, the OV, right? Because he's having close fights with these Eastern European, Kazakhstani fighters, he's got to be the real deal. Because if those are the best fighters on the planet. And this is the thing. Guram was good. He is still good. I actually like Guram's style. He's an entertaining fighter to watch. I root for Guram. He won his last fight. I was very wait, did he win his last fight? It was against the British guy. I forget his name. He's fighting on the UK card coming up soon. Someone remind me of his name. But yeah, Guram actually won that, and I was super stoked to see him get back in the win column. But, people were hyping this guy up, and I was like, dude, he's good, I get it, but he's so overrated. And you guys are just being fooled because, essentially, why was Guram, able to have competitive fights is because he would be, this really flashy fighter. He would shoot a takedown, he would throw a spinning wheel kick, he would throw a nice crispy 1-2, and because he had the Kutateladze, Kutateladze's from Georgia, because he was from that region and not just wrestling, but also wrestling sometimes and throwing spinning wheel kicks. He was as well-rounded as it gets. This is the modern era to a T. And I was like, dude, you guys are being fooled just because he mixes it up. He doesn't actually impose his will that much. And someone really simple who's just tough is going to be able to beat him. And Elvis Brenner went out there and beat him. You know what I mean? So that was my moment where I, had my, I told you moment, right? But I like Guram Kutateladze. I like Cody Garbrandt. I like both Guram Kutateladze and Cody Garbrandt. But again, Guram unfortunately didn't pan out the way we thought he would. I hope that he's able to win his next few fights. But yeah, he's just not as good as we thought he was. Same with Cody Garbrandt. But let's get on to the next one. Andre Muniz. Man. Dude, I remember this era so well. And he's still fighting in the UFC. Andre Muniz is pretty good. Middleweight. But if you don't know, this guy was the boogeyman of the middleweight division when it comes to grapplers. Remember the Adesanya title reign? Remember the early days of the title reign? Back when the middleweight division was really just barren wasteland. It was Adesanya, Whitaker, and everyone else sucked. Anyone with a glimmer of skill and a glimmer of grappling was hyped up as well, this is the guy. Guy is going to be a problem. That's why people were talking about Marvin Vettori as a future champion back in the day because he was well-rounded. And that was so rare in the middleweight division. And he was relatively young, right? So everyone was well, Vettori's obviously going to be fighting for belts over and over and over again. But the middleweight division just sucked. So Muniz at the time, he submitted Jacare Souza. Jacare Souza, just so good on the ground, right? He has this grappling pedigree, UFC legend. And Jacare, keep in mind, he was a geriatric at the time, extremely old, wobbly, cobbly, not all there. Andre Muniz submits him, and everyone's like, whoa. That's basically submitting Khabib to some of these fans. And I was like, dude, you guys are overreacting. Jacare's old as fuck. And then people started hyping him up. It was well, it's only a matter of time before Andre Muniz, sneaks his way to the title. And I want to see what happens when he gets his hands on Adesanya. Right? Dan Hardy was saying, I reckon he could beat Izzy. If he gets a hold of him, that's going to be the problem. Right? So Dan Hardy was hyping him up. And this was a regular hardcore take. It wasn't just Dan Hardy. Most hardcores were just yeah, Muniz probably beats Izzy, And he didn't really pan out because, again, just a few years ago, if you guys remember, the middleweight division was just genuinely horrible. There was nobody there. And it's just done a complete 180. It's now one of the most stacked divisions with prospects. But yeah, Muniz was one of the boogeymen, if you don't remember. Right? We're talking about Andre Yanez. Andre Yanez, Adrian Yanez. This was recent. Adrian Yanez. I remember After that, Dana White Contender Series performance where he looked like mini Masvidal, people started catching on to him. And then he had a couple of, early UFC KOs, head kick KO, right? He had that, gritty performance against Randy Costa where he got pieced up but then came on strong with a Max Holloway style of volume beatdown. And then the talk started. Oh, Yanez versus O'Malley would feed families, man. Honestly, Petr Yan's a good boxer, but Yanez, man, that's the real deal. That's the guy that really gives Petr Yan a tough fight. They don't want Yanez. Yan doesn't want Yanez. Remember that? And I thought Yanez was really that good as well until he fought Davy Grant. The Davy Grant fight where he got his hand raised, but he should have lost, to be honest. That was the fight where I was like, all right, I think it's time to pump the brakes, right? Because, Davy Grant was able to do this to him. And Davy Grant, crafty, always a game opponent, but, he's not the who's who of the division. And then he got slumped out against, then he had his comeback moment where he was able to beat that guy, I forget his name, who was talking some shit on the Texas card. And then he fought Rob Font, and then it was like, this guy's just too small for the division. And then we sort of think of Yanez now as like, he's pretty good, but he's one-dimensional. He's kind of undersized for bantamweight. So Yanez at one time was talked about as like, he was like Peyton Talbot before Peyton Talbot. You know what I mean? Different styles and all that, but Yanez had the hype of like a Peyton Talbot for the hardcore fans. We were like, it's only a matter of time before this guy's ranked in the top 5. And it didn't pan out. Unfortunately, I mean, that's literally what this video is for. It did not pan out. Same thing for Robelis Despaigne. And by the way, I'm just going to say this for Guram and Muniz. It not panning out doesn't mean that they can't still win UFC fights. They can still be decent UFC fighters. They can, have a UFC career that lasts another 5 years, but panning out, I'm talking about like, did they hit our expectations? That's basically what I mean. We expected Yanez to, be a staple in the top 10. I expected Robelis Despaigne to be a staple in the top 3 at heavyweight. I was basically saying, this guy's KOing everybody. Remember when the Weasel dropped his video? That's how everyone found out about Robelis Despaigne. When Robelis signed to the UFC, the Weasel dropped a video, and it was like, oh, this is the only UFC fighter with a longer reach than John Jones, Olympic silver medalist in Taekwondo. Every single one of his MMA fights hasn't gone past 10 seconds. He knocks out his first opponent, which was Josh Parisian, who, you got to give him credit. Josh Parisian really tried. And then it was like, Robelis Despaigne, you can already write him in as fighting for a belt in 2026. Just put it on there because we already know the outcome of every single matchup until he fights Jilton Almeida or Tom Aspinall. And he gets beat by Waldo Cortez Acosta. Simple Acosta, who is, let's be honest, he's got some good footwork. He could be a little bit creative on the feet, but it just took a regular heavyweight, like not even one of the better heavyweights, a run-of-the-mill heavyweight, and there's only like 20 heavyweights. So you got the 5 heavyweights that just, the apex heavyweights, then you got the run-of-the-mills, and then you got the top 10. He got beat by a run-of-the-mill heavyweight. And then he got beat again, and now he's cut from the UFC, and he's fighting in karate combat, and he's knocking people out again, but I thought it was 100% guaranteed that this guy is just going to annihilate everybody because he's athletic and he's going to be able to shuck off all the heavyweights easily with takedown defense because heavyweights can't grapple, but not even him could stuff takedowns, which is just insane. So I was saying he could beat Stipe right now. Remember when Stipe was booked to fight John Jones? We were all complaining about that. I was like, dude, Robelis would slump Stipe out now, dude. And obviously I don't even think that's true. Stipe probably would beat him. So, Robelis Despaigne didn't pan out the way we thought he would. I don't know why Cody Garbrandt is written like this. It is Javid Basharat. Javid Basharat. This guy was making it to every single MMA YouTuber's top prospects list. He was the real hardcore fans' dream fighter, right? You had the last name, Basharat. You have the look, right? You have the grappling style. You have the long-rangey striking, brother. You got everything in there. You got the grappling, the control. If somebody can control someone at the bantamweight level, because bantamweights can grapple. Bantamweights are so well-rounded, nobody holds each other down, right? That's basically how it is. Nobody's getting held down and smudged at bantamweight. They're too good. This guy was controlling people at bantamweight. He was throwing flimsy deep kicks at range into takedowns, how well-rounded he was. And he had all the people tricked into believing, well, yeah, man, he was like the more niche Guram Kutateladze, right? We weren't talking about him as, yeah, right now he could be fighting for a title. No one would even blink, right? But it was more along the lines of, yeah, I mean, obviously Basharat's going to be he's the future. Obviously, he's the future. And they still didn't catch on until last week, basically. They still didn't catch on until a week and a half ago. All right, when Javid Basharat fought Ricky Simon, and most people picked Ricky Simon. I think it was like 90%. I'm sorry. Most people picked, 90% of people picked Basharat over Ricky Simon because they were like, well, Basharat lost to Edmen Shabazyan, but Edmen Shabazyan's now booked to fight Aldo, and that means he's very good. And Ricky Simon's on a downside, man. You got to go with Javid Basharat. Zero ability to cause danger, harm to other fighters with his hands. No power. As I said, he's like got the toothpick power. It's like you're getting hit with a toothpick. Someone just chucks a toothpick at you, right? And okay wrestling and control, but can't really impose his will. Edmen Shabazyan, and this is the thing, Edmen Shabazyan's okay. And all he had to do was just move forward a little bit and throw some punches. And that was it. And, now Javid Basharat, I mean, he's just looking like he's going to be one of the run-of-the-mill unranked bantamweights, right? Instead of like a future top 10 staple. Bobby Green. Now you're probably going to ask yourself, well, what do you mean it didn't pan out? Obviously, like, no one expected Bobby Green to be a champion. I get that. But there was a time, a very brief time, only lasted about a month, maybe even a couple of weeks, where there was an expectation that Bobby Green was having his Masvidal moment, the 2019 Masvidal resurgence, where Masvidal was sort of under the radar, and then he knocks out Darren Till, causes an upset. Upsets Ben Askren, flying knees him, beats Nate Diaz, and now all of a sudden he's the biggest star of the sport. Bobby Green almost had one of those moments. Remember, he destroyed Nasrat Haqparast. I forget the fight before that. I know he fought Lando Venata like a few fights before that and had a war with Lando. He destroys Nasrat. Oh, and then it was Ally Quinta, destroyed Ally Quinta, knocked him out in one round. And he was like fighting every few months, and it seemed like, oh shit, dude, Green is so entertaining. He's finally getting his flowers. Then he gets into the conversation of, dude, Green versus McGregor, man. Green versus Nate Diaz. Green for the BMF belt. Then he accepts Islam Makhachev on short notice, and his name blows up even more. And it's like for 2 weeks, this guy was the most popular fighter in the UFC. 2 weeks, Bobby Green was owning the UFC. And then it just it completely fizzled out after how easily Islam Makhachev beat him, which was like a one-round TKO, first few minutes. But yeah, that's what I mean. Like, there was an expectation that Green had finally achieved the Masvidal status after Masvidal had beat Askren, and he was on the verge of like the Nate Diaz BMF fights. It didn't exactly pan out. Unfortunately, I think he had a couple other opportunities. I think he was then booked to fight Dober, and then he got KO'd, and then he had a win, and we thought, oh man, Bobby Green's back, and then he gets finished by Jalen Turner. So, I mean, Bobby Green, UFC legend. The fans enjoy watching his fights, but didn't get to that next superstardom level. So it didn't pan out. Curtis Blaydes. I am a fan of Curtis Blaydes, but there was a time where, sort of like the middleweight division back in the day, it was really a wasteland for anyone that could grapple. There was no Jilton Almeida. There was no Tom Aspinall on the loose. Aspinall was still a tadpole at this time. And Curtis Blaydes was the wrestler, right? Blaydes was the only guy that could wrestle, and he had okay hands, and that just meant 100%, well, it's just a matter of time. It's not if, but when this guy's going to be fighting for a belt. You would constantly hear hardcore fans saying things like, well, Blaydes has had a tough run, but you guys know as well as I do, this guy's going to be a champion someday. It's just a lock. And of course, you can't really blame them because, again, we didn't know how good Aspinall was going to be. We didn't know even at the time how good Gane was going to be. This was like 2022, right? Where it's like Blaydes is on the loose, and eventually this guy, and even when he's losing, he gets knocked out by Lewis, right? Going into the Pavlovich fight, people were like, well, I mean, come on, dude. Like, you're picking Pavlovich. Blaydes is obviously going to be a champion someday. Why are you picking Pavlovich? And it was, the energy was, let's just keep the belt warm for Blaydes. Eventually, he's going to get it. Today may not be his day, but eventually he's going to get it. And unfortunately, you got a guy like Aspinall out here who's just a phenom. I mean, Gane was a phenom at one time. And you also have Aspinall. And then Jones moves up. So it's just a tough fucking world for Curtis Blaydes. Even guys like Sergey Pavlovich, who, you know, we don't know how good he's going to be in the future, but even he has sort of fallen off a little bit, and he beat Blaydes. So, you know, Blaydes went from being like this undeniable future champion to he's always going to be a staple in the top 10, but I don't know if he'll ever be champ. So, yeah. Ciryl Gane, speaking of Gane, the LeBron James of MMA. Let's just go back to 2023, right before the Jones fight. And I'm going to speak about Gane as if it's before the Jones fight. It's just a matter of time, guys, before this guy becomes the GOAT. I mean, listen, Jones is good, but that's the old school. That's the Jordan, man. This is LeBron, man. Everything Jones can do, Gane can do better. All right? Jones throws a spinning back kick. Gane's throwing a spinning back kick, and he's following up with an oblique kick. All right? And he's floating on the outside. Yeah, you talk about Jones being so talented for the upper weight classes. Gane moves like a cat at heavyweight. And he's also big and athletic for the division. He could shuck people off like it's nothing. Future heavyweight GOAT, pieces up John Jones. I know not everybody was saying that. But, like, listen, I was saying he was LeBron James. I was saying he's the most talented heavyweight of all time. Keep in mind, this is right before Tom Aspinall really made his resurgence. I guess technically this was after Aspinall beat Volkov, but it wasn't really until Aspinall had fought, because then he took a long time off. You know, Aspinall, they used to freaking put him on the shelf for decades, it seemed. Now he's on the shelf, but it's not his fault. But, like, you know, Aspinall fought Volkov, and then he had to wait a year for Curtis Blaydes. So he was not, like, so active, knocking everybody out left and right. But we knew he was good. But it was like, all right, but Gane's like, you know, his real test is Aspinall. But until then, he's going to piece up Jones. And it just didn't pan out. I mean, this is the thing. He's still good, but Gane went from being 100% like future heavyweight GOAT material to staple in the top 5. But he's just one of the guys. And this is the thing. There's not like a big, you know, there's no more aura for Gane at heavyweight. It's not like he's standing out. He's just he's with Blaydes. He's with Pavlovich. You know, he's with Volkov. Volkov beat him in the last fight. You know what I mean? Volkov beat him in the last fight. So now it's really like, you know, he's just one of the guys, one of the ranked guys. But back in the day, that wasn't the case. Benoit Saint Denis. Now, I still think Benoit Saint Denis, again, like everybody on this list, can have a decent UFC career, although the next one's going to be a real tough one, him versus Joel Alvarez. Apparently, he's working with a new team, but what were the expectations for Benoit? The expectations after, and I can't believe, I mean, listen, I'm not usually the pump the brakes guy, but like I should have been the pump the brakes guy after he beat Frevola, because it was like, bro, Frevola barely ranked in the first place. He's beating Frevola, and all of a sudden that's enough for us to say this guy's going to beat Poirier. I should have known, man. I should have known it was too much of a jump up in competition. But, you know, we talk about Shavkat Rakhmonov, how he like farms aura and all that. Benoit Saint Denis was the biggest aura farmer, aura merchant in history, dude. In history. The backstory, mercenary, right? You know, he's freaking saying his prayers in church, and we're seeing edits of that. And, dude, Benoit Saint Denis, he just seemed too good to be true, man. You know, head kicking people, body kick, you know, pushing people backwards. And then, just like that, it seems, in the blink of an eye, all of a sudden, Benoit Saint Denis is a couple fights away from being cut. I thought, like, yeah, he's a bad matchup for Charles. Charles loses to brothers. Benoit Saint Denis, not a brother, but he's got that style. He beats Charles, right? I was saying he's as dominant as Habib was in his first few fights. And actually, there was some truth to that. I was only talking about his first few lightweight fights. Like, Benoit Saint Denis was dismantling people and running through people with absolutely hardly any resistance and finishing them. But obviously, like, relating him to Habib, some people didn't like that. Didn't age well. And, you know, I said he beats old man Dustin. Didn't beat old man Dustin. Then I blamed it on the staff. Gets destroyed by Renato Moicano. So we'll see. We'll see. You know, I was saying Benoit Saint Denis, I'm going to pick him to win every fight until he fights Makhachev. That's the one fight I'll probably then start to think, you know, let's get into the weeds a little bit. Let's break this one down. But until then, I was like, you know, I'm picking him to win every fight. It was the aura. So Benoit St. Denis. Didn't pan out the way we thought he would, but, hopefully he's able to get a couple of wins so he can stay in the mix. The lightweight division is better when Benoit the Marauder Denis is on the loose, all right? It's better when that's the case. Johnny Walker, man, when this guy was on the come up, we thought it was inevitable that the Walker era was upon us. This was the one guy bigger than John Jones. Forget John Jones being big for light heavyweight. Johnny Walker would mog John Jones. 6'6", like huge, muscular, flying knees, elbows, right? Knocking out Khalil Roundtree, knocking people's heads out of the stadium, dude. Johnny Walker was leaping through the sky with his athleticism. And then he fights old man Corey Anderson with a simple old takedown threat, and a big overhand, and Corey Anderson knocks him out. Corey Anderson's dancing around, man. Corey Anderson had the biggest crash out ever after beating Johnny Walker. He sort of kept his cool that week, and then that crash out had Corey Anderson thinking he was going to be the next GOAT of the division. You remember when he fought Jan Blachowicz, and Anderson was like, man, I'm going to destroy this old man. I already beat this guy. When he was fighting Jan Blachowicz, Corey Anderson was like really drinking his Kool-Aid, and then he gets destroyed by Jan Blachowicz. But Anderson had the biggest crash out after beating Johnny Walker. If you remember, he was, I think they were playing like I forget the song, but it was like, if I can't, it was like a 50 Cent song. And Corey Anderson was like dancing in celebration, but angry. Like, how fighters, when they get the upset win, they walk past the media members outside of the cage. Corey Anderson was like dancing in their faces while yelling at them. And, it was a funny ass moment, very funny moment. But going into that fight, we were all convinced Walker's going to destroy this old man and he's going to fight John Jones and, destroy Jones. And obviously it got halted. Since then, Johnny Walker has not beat anyone decent. I think his best win since then is Guram Kutateladze, Paul Craig, Anthony Smith, which are like, they're that level of fighter. They're not like elite fighters. So Johnny Walker didn't pan out. Still a fun fighter to watch. Edmen Shabazyan, the Phenom, the first guy to start training MMA while growing up. Remember that? Edmen Shabazyan was like Ronda Rousey's, training partner. The same guy that was coaching Ronda Rousey was coaching Edmen Shabazyan. It was like, man, this guy's Phenom, just wait. And he gets to the UFC and he's chinning everybody, knocking everybody out. Right? And then he knocks out Brad Tavares. Nobody KOs Brad Tavares. Nobody. But Edmen Shabazyan head kicks him, knocks him out first round. All of a sudden, it's off to the races. Yeah, man, this is Adesanya's next toughest opponent. And then he gets beat by Brunson. He gets beat by Hermanson. He gets TKO'd by Nasruddin Imavov, Tadpole Imavov. And here we are. But, Edmen Shabazyan still is decent. He's only 27 years old. So, like, there still is a chance for him to actually like hit his peak at like 29, 28 and, make the rankings, but it was severely halted and we don't know if he'll ever be ranked right now, although he's coming off of a good knockout win and maybe he'll be able to reach the rankings. But yeah, it didn't pan out the way we thought it would, but there still is some time. We'll see. Paulo Costa. I think it's his gas tank. His gas tank's not very good. Paulo Costa. The biggest marauder on the planet for one day against Yoel Romero. The one guy to walk down Yoel Romero and eat his punches like Tic Tacs. Ridiculous power. Remember, Paulo Costa was seen as like the biggest power puncher in UFC history, right? He's not looked at as the biggest power puncher in UFC history, but like Paulo Costa's, this guy's massive. He's going to knock everybody out just because he was like, big and he had some thud on his punches. I guess he technically dropped Yoel Romero. I don't like to talk about that. I'm a big Yoel Romero fan. I don't like to talk about that. But yeah, now he's the guy with the most overrated power ever. Now he's the guy that, couldn't impose his will on Adesanya. He had the craziest performance against Yoel, walking through Yoel Romero overhands. I thought Yoel won that fight, but it was very close. You got to give it to Costa. Not you got to give it to him, but like it was a close fight. You got to at least respect the fucking effort. And I expected him to run through Adesanya. Everyone was picking him to beat Adesanya. Not everybody, but a lot of people. We thought the Costa era was here. Adesanya's little freaking, fruity pebble punches and toothpick power kicks aren't going to do shit to him. And then Adesanya shows up with the gyno and he destroys Paulo Costa. And since then, Paulo Costa just not been able to KO anyone. He got beat by Vettori, and that was really the last straw that broke the camel's back when this guy got beat by Vettori. So, Paulo Costa, he's entertaining, but we thought, he was going to be a champion or constantly. And now he would be like the Rumble Johnson of middleweight if he wouldn't be a champion, and that didn't happen. Kevin Lee, man. I remember, man. Kevin Lee was hyped up a lot, and then he lost Tony Ferguson, but then he was still getting hyped up a lot because he was this well-rounded wrestler who could also strike, right? He's a wrestler that can strike too, and he's got a long reach. So he loses to Tony Ferguson, and then it's okay, it was a little bit too soon. Tony Ferguson's just built different. Kevin Lee, he'll be back in the future, man. This guy's obviously going to be a top 5 staple, right? And then he has that fight with Ally Quinta, and Kevin Lee's talking a whole bunch of smack. He lost Ally Quinta in the first fight, but he was a tadpole. There's a good excuse. Man, I'm going to destroy this guy. Ally Quinta beats him. Then he fights RDA, man. RDA is not that good, man. He ain't that good. He's falling off. Then RDA submits Kevin Lee, and then he comes back and he knocks out the fisherman. I forget his name. Gregor Gillespie, who had unreal cardio, but then he destroyed his career because he would only fight Tony Ferguson. So it was like, oh, man, he knocked out Gregor Gillespie, who was an absolute boogeyman. Gregor Gillespie was like the Marab back in the day. And after that, he fought Charles Oliveira, got destroyed, and then it was kind of the end. Then he returned, fought Renat. I was like, man, Renat's overrated as fuck. Kevin Lee's going to beat him. And Renat, just, we saw what happened in that one. It was a bad one. And he lost to Daniel Rodriguez, too, man. He got pieced up in that one. So, yeah, I mean, there was a time where we thought, man, Kevin Lee versus Khabib would be a pretty good matchup, but, didn't happen. And last but not least, the real McGregor, Darren Till, who on the come-up had aura. He was playing Sweet Caroline. He had that fight with Wonderboy Thompson, the chess match of the century. Nothing's happening, but they're throwing a simple technique once in a while, and oh my God, it's just so high level. And they're saying, ole, 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 ole. And it's making people think about McGregor, right? And he's got the left hand, and he ran through Cowboy. That's why he's the real McGregor, because he was like the technical McGregor. Remember back in the day when McGregor was getting a bunch of hate? Because remember, Darren Till didn't lose until before the McGregor-Khabib fight. But back in the day, when McGregor took a lot of time off and Darren Till was on the rise because McGregor was fighting Floyd Mayweather, there was like this sort of idea that McGregor's not serious, man. He's just a trash talker. He's still a clown, man. And Darren Till's the real deal, because Darren Till, even though, he's a brash Englishman, man, he's talking some shit, he's the real deal technical guy, because he's not as clowny as McGregor, which is just ridiculous. And Darren Till couldn't even land a single punch on Tyron Woodley. I don't think he got a single significant strike. Had the worst title fight performance ever. Gets knocked out by Jorge Mad Dog and gets discouraged, but moves up to middleweight, has a, boring ass fight with Kelvin Gastelum. Then he starts getting progressively smaller from fight to fight. But had this silver lining moment with Whitaker. Was like, man, he had this boring fight, but now he's having this, he lost to Whitaker, but the silver lining is that it was competitive. And, no excuses, but how can you not watch that fight and just know I'm going to be in the top 5? I'm starting to turn into Pimblet. How do you not watch that fight and know I'm going to be top 5 for the next 10 years, mate? Right? And he stuck around for another year. So it was the injuries. It was the getting fat outside of camp. That was the thing that kind of led to Darren Till, like his ACL giving out in every fight. Now, I honestly have my take, and this is a bit of a hot take, is that Darren Till actually was extreme. Because now it's like the take these days is like Darren Till always sucked. He was always overrated. His talent wasn't that great. Darren Till's talent was amazing. Darren Till was really the case of he sort of got in his own way with the injuries, getting fat outside of camp, getting discouraged. Because this guy did give Dricus du Plessis a hell of a tough fight on the feet. Schooled Dricus du Plessis. His distance management was amazing, dude. People used to talk about, man, Till versus Adesanya would be amazing. I still think if he were to fight Adesanya, he would have beat him. Okay? If Darren Till was just healthy and threw more than only a left hand, because that was the other thing. It was so frustrating. You just wanted to see Darren Till go out there and throw more than 2 punches. Because remember, before the Woodley fight, Darren Till was a patient fighter in the Wonder Boy fight, but that was just a one-off, right? And then it turned into, wait a second, Darren Till's really only a fucking 5-strike fighter, a round type of guy after he fought, Woodley, 0 significant strikes, and then he fights frickin', Whitaker hardly throws any strikes. To be fair, he threw a lot of strikes against Masvidal, but he got chinned, and then it, kind of became too defensive. Talked about how he was, terrified going out to fight Calvin Gastelum because he was coming off of the KO loss, and that's why he was really reserved. But then it kind of turned into this whole thing where he was really only literally throwing like a left hand. And you would see him throw leg kicks, and his kicks would be amazing, right? And he had a big frame, but he just wouldn't bulk up for whatever reason. He moved up to get away from the weight cut, but didn't grow into the weight class. You just knew if Darren Till had taken it a little bit more serious when it comes to strength and conditioning and shit like that, outside of camp, he could have had better takedown defense. He would have been sturdier, and a sturdy Darren Till, in my opinion, could have beaten Adesanya. But it didn't pan out, and he left the UFC when he was still young. So, I feel like at this point it might be too late because he's been doing a lot of boxing, not working on takedown defense. And when that happens and you stop doing the wrestling and all that, it's really over. But, man, if Darren Till just stuck around, got healthy, I honestly still think he could be really good. But it didn't pan out. It didn't pan out. So that is the last guy that is on this list. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time. It's time to stop compromising on your diet. Put the sweetie treaties down, and enough eating the frosty toasty bite protein cookies just because you see there's protein in them. Guys, there's another world that you can live in, reality, where you can have sweet and tasty comfort foods without bullshit ingredients. And that's why I've created the Real Food Cookbook. That's right. If you want to be able to enjoy yourself while getting lean, while getting in shape, and you want to be able to eat tasty foods, even like chocolate chip cookies, well, the Real Food Cookbook gives you an alternative to all your favorite comfort foods just made with whole and unprocessed ingredients. If you're interested in checking the Real Food Cookbook out, the link is in the description. Use code MMA for 30% off.